of the work a pastor must do in his own soul to care for it is to process emotions, what he's feeling, and try to understand that and then work through that. Have you always been good at processing your emotions, understanding what's going on in your own soul?
The answer is no. Like most men cannot answer that question. And actually, we probably need to acknowledge that a pastor can be a pastor and do his work and not do this. It's not going to go well for him eventually. But this is not a requirement to the level like, being faithful to your wife is in being a pastor, right? But I would say it's equally important because we're talking about being a pastor dealing with his own burdens, his own personal burdens, his own pain of his life, carrying the burdens of others, dealing with their pain and trying to empathize with them. I think that we're not taught how to process emotions well. And to realize that emotions are not bad in themselves, but they're part of being a human being. The problem is that our emotions can take us to sinful places, even pretty easily. But what I have found is the problem is a lot of people then see just emotion as bad. And so one of the ways we deal with or even survive emotional pain, even from growing up and things, is we shut it down. And the amount of pastors that I work with, I was a pastor for a decade and a half before I actually really started to learn how to emotionally process in a healthy way. So I just want to urge pastors to make sure you learn how to process emotion in a healthy way. It actually enhances your ministry. It doesn't hurt it, but it makes you vulnerable. It's scary to do that, to show sadness, to show anger, to acknowledge fear to your wife, to your church. Like that takes courage to do that. And so, but I would argue that it's part of being a healthy human being, and it enhances your ministry as a pastor. Have you found the same thing?
Yes, like you described. I think the natural inclination is to avoid thinking about our own emotions, or certainly avoid talking about them or trying to process them in any sense. Just be closed off. I'm not just overtly an emotional person, I think by temperament, by personality, which is to say there are things going on inside, but I try to keep those things inside. It's not something that generally will spill out. And so being able to understand and know what's going on in my own heart, and to think about it rightly, to think about the way my heart's responding to a situation, and then measure that against the scripture, the way my heart ought to be responding. And what does that say about my heart, that it's being driven to these places, whether it's anger or something like that, or despondency? Why am I going to those places? And trying to really evaluate that, and then apply the resources of scripture to understand what I ought to be doing. But it's one of those vital places, but it can be ignored for a long time. Yeah. A pastor can do outwardly faithful ministry for a long time, preach the word, minister to people.
That's right.
And really be closed off emotionally, and to the detriment of his own soul.
Emotions give us a language to express what's happening in our soul. And we express it to God, we express it to others. And when we fail to do that, we're really cutting off a big part of what makes us human. And I think if we need any kind of motivation to try to embrace this idea and understand our humanity, Jesus was the model for us. If you read the New Testament, there's plenty of people who don't like emotion, so we skirt over the parts that show Jesus' true and deep emotion, from weeping at the tomb of Lazarus, to this anguish in the Garden of Gethsemane, to the righteous anger when he flipped the table. Like, that's all emotion not remotely tainted with sin, because he was sinless. And we see that there's actually good things to come from embracing emotion in a healthy way. We're in a fallen world process, and if it doesn't mean, God also doesn't redeem that as part of who we are.
Yeah, one of the things that's helped me is just going to the Psalms and seeing the raw expressions of emotion.
The laments of the Psalms.
That's exactly right. And then even the journey of the psalmist from what is lament often to what is healing and the grace of God.
And the Psalms are a great place to point to, because the pattern of the Psalms, especially in these lament Psalms, is the psalmist crying out and saying some things that you're like, can he say that to God? And the answer is yes. God can handle whatever we bring. But I think what's important to see in the pattern is it usually ends with, but I trust you. And I think that's part of what God does in the human experience. We express emotion, don't hold back. It leads us to trusting God as God receives that from us.
It's good for us, and then good for the way we'll lead our folks, hopefully.
That's right.
Yeah, very good.